Welcome back to the House of Ravenbrook. I'm Eric Marquette, and as always I'm joined by the ever-illuminating Ruby Sturt. Today we're diving into a topic that's, well, a bit controversial. Miracles, mysticism, and the magic of Yeshua. Ruby, are you ready to stir the pot?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if we're not poking at sacred cows, are we even doing our job? But seriously, this is one of those topics that gets people riled up, right? Like the idea that Jesus, Yeshua, wasn't just a miracle worker, but maybe, just maybe, a practitioner of magic. That's a big one.
It is, and I think what's fascinating is, if you look at the historical context, first century Palestine, the Greco-Roman world, miracles and magic, weren't these totally separate things? The lines were blurry. You had Jewish mystics, you had the Magi, you had all sorts of esoteric traditions swirling around. The Gospels themselves are full of stories that, depending on your lens, could be seen as either divine intervention or, well, advanced spiritual practice.
Yeah, and it's not just Christianity either. Like the whole region was a melting pot. You had the Essenes doing their thing out in the desert, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and then all these folk practices, amulets, incantations, healing rituals. It wasn't weird to believe in miracles or magic. It was just part of life. And honestly, some of the stuff Jesus did, turning water into wine, healing the sick, exorcising demons, those are classic moves in the magical playbook, if you ask me.
Exactly, and the book, The Christian Witch, really digs into this, arguing that the sharp divide between religion and magic is a later invention. In the ancient world, the supernatural was just natural. Miracles weren't necessarily seen as breaking the rules of nature, but as working with deeper laws that maybe only a few people understood. And that's where the magic comes in.
And I love that the Gospels themselves are kind of ambiguous. Sometimes the miracle is all about Jesus's power. Sometimes it's about the faith of the person being healed. Sometimes it's a symbol. Sometimes it's a challenge to the authorities. It's messy. And honestly, I think that's more interesting than a neat, tidy answer.
Absolutely. And you know, I had this experience a few years ago. I was invited to a ritual that blended Christian and Jewish mystical elements. There were prayers in Hebrew, invocations of the Shekinah, and then right in the middle, a reading from the Gospels about the wedding at Cana. And the whole thing was framed as a kind of alchemical transformation, water into wine as a metaphor for spiritual awakening. It really made me question where the boundaries are between faith and magic. Are they even separate at all?
That's so Ravenbrook, isn't it? Like, the whole tradition is about breaking down those artificial walls. And honestly, I think that's what makes this conversation so relevant. Not just for history nerds, but for anyone who's ever wondered if there's more to the story than what you get in Sunday school.
Right. And as we've talked about in previous episodes, especially when we looked at the roots of division and the need to reclaim spirituality, it's about seeing the bigger picture. The miracles aren't just about supernatural fireworks, they're about transformation, about challenging the status quo, about opening up new possibilities. And that's where the magic really lives.
So let's get into the juicy stuff. Kabbalah, Merkava, and all that mystical goodness. Eric, you're the one with the fancy diagrams, so do you want to kick us off?
Ha! I do love a good diagram. So Kabbalah is this incredibly rich tradition within Judaism. And at its heart is the idea that the divine isn't just out there, but is manifesting through these 10 sephirot, attributes or emanations arranged on the tree of life. It's not just a static chart, it's a map of how divine energy flows into the world. And crucially, it's not about a God who's totally separate, but a God who's immanent, present in everything.
And the tree of life itself, look, I'll be honest, the first time I tried to draw it, it was on a napkin at like 2 a.m, and it looked more like a squashed spider than a cosmic diagram. But even then, there was something about it that just clicked. It's like, here's a way to visualize the invisible, to anchor all these abstract ideas in something you can actually see. And that's what I love about mystical traditions. They give you tools to make sense of the ineffable.
Exactly, and the Kabbalists weren't just sitting around theorizing. They were doing rituals, meditating on divine names, using gematria to find hidden meanings in scripture. It's a whole system for engaging with the divine, not just believing in it. And there are real parallels with Christian ideas about miracles and divine intervention. Instead of God just zapping things from on high, it's about energy flowing through channels, about transformation from within.
And then you've got Merkava mysticism, which is all about visionary journeys like Ezekiel's chariot vision. These weren't just stories, they were blueprints for mystical experience. People would prepare themselves, sometimes for years, to have these encounters with the divine. And the language is so wild. Wheels within wheels, angels, fire, glory. It's not about dogma, it's about direct experience. And that's something that really resonates with the Ravenbrook path too. This idea that you can have your own encounter with the sacred, not just read about someone else's.
Absolutely. And what's fascinating is how these Jewish mystical ideas filtered into early Christianity. You see echoes of the tree of life, of divine immanence, even in the way miracles are described. And as you said, the symbols matter. They're not just decorations, they're anchors for experience. Whether it's the tree of life, the chariot, or even the bread and wine, these symbols are ways to access deeper realities.
And honestly, I think that's why people keep coming back to these traditions. It's not just about believing the right things. It's about finding ways to connect, to experience, to transform. And sometimes that means drawing a wobbly tree of life on a napkin at 2 a.m. And sometimes it means sitting in silence and waiting for the chariot to show up. Either way, it's about making the mystical real.
And it's worth noting too that these traditions weren't static. They evolved, they borrowed from each other, they adapted to new contexts. Just like the Ravenbrook tradition, which is always integrating new insights, always open to reinterpretation. It's a living path, not a museum piece. So let's get to the heart of the matter. Yeshua as a magician. This is where things get really interesting, and honestly, a bit radical. There's a growing body of research, some of it speculative but grounded in history, that suggests Jesus wasn't just a preacher or a prophet, but a practitioner of mystical arts. He was influenced by Kabbalah, by the Essenes, by Hellenistic philosophy, even by Gnostic ideas. Ruby, what's your take?
Look, I know this is a hot take, but it actually makes a lot of sense. If you look at the miracles, not as supernatural interruptions, but as demonstrations of advanced spiritual skills, it changes everything. Healing, exorcism, turning water into wine, walking on water, these are all things you find in the magical and mystical traditions of the time. And the idea that Jesus might have trained, maybe even been initiated in some of these practices? That's not as far-fetched as it sounds. The Essenes, for example, were all about ritual purity, meditation, and preparing for direct encounters with the divine. And the Gnostics, don't get me started, were obsessed with secret knowledge, inner transformation, and the idea that the divine spark is within all of us.
Exactly. And the socio-political context matters too. First century Judea was a powder keg. Roman occupation, economic inequality, religious factions fighting for control. Yeshua's miracles weren't just party tricks. They were acts of social justice, challenges to the status quo, ways of empowering the marginalized. And when you look at the diversity of early Christian thought, Peter, Paul, the Gnostics, the communities that didn't make it into the official canon, you see a tradition that was anything but monolithic. It was experimental, inclusive, and frankly a bit wild.
And that's what I love about the Ravenbrook tradition too. It's not about locking things down or saying, this is the only way. It's about honoring the diversity, the messiness, the creativity of spiritual life. Early Christianity was like that too, at least before it got institutionalized. There were debates, disagreements, different practices in different places. Some groups leaned into the mystical, some into the ethical, some into the social. And that's what made it so vibrant.
And if we bring it back to the present, I think there's a real hunger for that kind of spirituality. One that's open, inclusive, and willing to learn from the past without being trapped by it. The Ravenbrook path, with its emphasis on personal experience, community, and ongoing evolution, is a modern echo of that early diversity. It's about reclaiming the magic, the mystery, and the transformative power that's always been at the heart of the tradition, even if it's been hidden or suppressed at times.
Yeah, and I think that's the invitation for all of us, not just to read about miracles or magicians or mystics, but to actually step into the story ourselves, to experiment, to question, to connect, and to find our own way into the mystery. That's what makes this path alive. And honestly, that's what keeps me coming back for more.
Well said. And as we wrap up, I just want to say, this conversation is far from over. There's so much more to explore, from the hidden teachings of the Gnostics to the living practices of modern mystics. So, if you're listening and you're feeling a bit unsettled or a bit inspired, that's exactly where you're meant to be. Ruby, any final words?
Just this. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and don't be afraid to get a little weird. The House of Ravenbrook is all about embracing the mystery, and we're so glad you're on the journey with us. Eric, thanks for another wild ride.
Thank you, Ruby, and thank you to everyone listening. We'll see you next time, right here in the house. Until then, stay curious and stay magical. Goodbye.
Bye, everyone. Take care and keep the wonder alive.